everyone, welcome to Wicked West Books. My name is Meg West, and this video is 2 years in the making. I first made a note in my phone on September 15th, 2016, and have been collecting versions of the sentence ever since. I apologize that it might get a little bit repetitive and annoying. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. It was as though he had taken a constraining hand off of me, and I let out my breath, not realizing until then that I had been holding it. He turned his attention back to the colonel, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I let out my breath in one long sigh. I hadn't even realized I had been holding it. He left me, and I took a gasping breath, not realizing I had been holding it. I pointed my gun at the ceiling and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I did not realize I had stopped breathing until the dragon back-winged to land in some clearing hidden from view. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and turned back to him. Belle let out a breath she hadn't even realized she had been holding. It didn't just make me catch my breath. It made me catch and hold, forgetting to breathe for a few seconds, so that when I did remember, my breath came out in a shaky gasp. Artemis exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and tried to think, and he realized that he was holding his breath. "Great," I said, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. He loosened his grip and breathed, not even realizing when he had began holding his breath. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and sagged a little against Asher. CK let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. When the door closed behind him, Micah let out a breath I hadn't realized he had been holding. I inhale, realizing I had been holding my breath. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and tension went away. And when I relaxed, so did he. I let out a breath, only having realized that I had been holding it. Jean-Claude relaxed against me, as if even he had been holding a breath that he didn't always need to take. Letting out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, she turned her attention to the matter at hand. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and nodded. She let out a sharp breath, only now realizing that she had been holding it. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The breath I did not realize I was holding rushes out as I pick up the wrinkled parchment. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. A warm rush of air fills my lungs. I don't know when I stopped breathing. I let out the last of a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and holstered my gun. I release a breath I hadn't realized I was holding when I see that Enan and Saren aren't among the new captives. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a breath of tension I hadn't realized I had been holding. Monty released the breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. Mikhail let out a sigh, not realizing that he had been holding his breath, and hoped that the queasiness he felt didn't show on his face. I released a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. She didn't realize she had been holding a breath until she let it out in a sigh. Simone let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Mikhail let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and shook his head. "Breathe," Suhail said with a grin. I had, without realizing it, began holding my air. I exhaled and smiled at him. Long moments passed, and I realized I was holding my breath and made myself exhale quietly. As I continue to watch the dark spot on the floor, I begin to realize I am holding my breath. Oh, sorry, I must have been holding my breath. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun paying attention over the past 2 years and collecting versions of the sentence. And I think I will continue to do so, just because sometimes these authors can get a little bit creative in what is a very, very repetitive sentence. Did you guys notice which book I found this sentence in, or a version of it, at least 5 times in one book? 5 times. But I think I'm going to keeping track of where I find it. And who knows, maybe in 2 years, you'll get another video that can annoy the crap out of you. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys with a new video next week. Have a wicked day.